Hello, everyone. This is Daniel Gimario, the founder and president of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, and I'm here once again for the monthly New Moon video blog. And I'm joined here today by Awen, who is helping the school out so much and is a member of our council. And we're going to be investigating something that was actually inspired by questions that Awen had asked me some time ago, who he was very curious about whenever he hears me talking about this being the third wave of the original vision. And so I wanted to have a discussion here today with some visual aids as to what the first wave was. Just to recap, the original vision came through in 1981, and through 1981 until 2007, the initial stages of the school operated under my own organization that was called the Harbingers of the Turning of the Ages. And then that was followed in the second wave by the work in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School as a 501c3 that started in 2007. And then since July of 2022, we're now operating as the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, the third wave of the original vision. So I wanted to have this sharing about what was actually happening in the 1980s. And it all started actually at Mount Shasta. And I do have some very ancient photos of the valley where I had a Vision Quest experience with Joan Halifax and members of the Ojai Foundation that fundamentally changed my life. I'd been an astrologer since about 1969, having studied in the School of Humanistic and Transpersonal Astrology of Dane Rajar. And meanwhile, I was also philosophically very oriented toward Eastern things. I had been a meditation teacher at a couple of different organizations. And already at that point, had been a world traveler. But based on this experience I had at Mount Shasta, it completely changed my approach in saying, if I'm going to continue to do astrology, it must be on the land and with the sky. And it brought back to me my love of the stars when I was a little boy, and having had learned the stars twice and promptly forgot them twice. And so this transmission came through of connection to the land and Shasta, and also the guidance, actually, the original guidance that came through at that point, which is, if you're going to be astrologer, if you're going to have a school, if you're going to be teaching other people, if you're going to be sharing this with anyone else, it should be with the knowledge of the sky, the night sky. You want to show, if you can, those Shasta pictures? It was actually in a place on Mount Shasta called Squaw Valley. And I'll here are some of the actually, which ones might we want there? Yeah, that's me back in 1981, actually.
No way.
Huh?
I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if that was you or not.
Oh yeah.
That's
Oh my
great.
gosh. Yes, that's me. And it was really wild how Joan Halifax set it up. We went into Panther Meadow, and we got there like in the evening, and he said, okay, we're going to hike in the dark 2 hours into Squaw Valley. And this is one of the groups there. And let's see, maybe one other one. Yeah, there, there's Joan down there at the bottom. There's me standing at the back looking away. And that was this original group of people. Often wondered actually where all those folks are now. I know where Joan is. I mean, she's actually quite a amazing teacher as a Buddhist nun at this point, actually. Well, she was heavily into core shamanism at that time period. And I had an experience there on the mountain where I went so far up on the ridge for my all-night vision quest. Oh, I forgot. So when we were hiking in, we were supposed to hike in totally in the dark, and then we couldn't see anything. and we put our sleeping bags down and slept. And so our first view of where we were was that morning when we woke up, and that was the site of this adventure. Maybe that one down on the far right is really interesting. Far left, yeah, that one. This was actually a group of individuals around Joan that went. This was not in Mount Shasta, but this was during a time period, something was very popular back in the late 70s and early 80s, which was Sun Bear's medicine wheel gatherings. And that's how I first became aware of Joan, because she had this collection of young people with her, and they were energizing the Ojai Foundation at that particular time period. And my friend Howard Hansen, who was my co-facilitator and collaborator in those years, we both just were so enraptured by by Joan and the women that she had around her that that's really what got us started, actually. And then back to just maybe one more shot of Squaw Valley, where maybe that's the more desolate area of it. Maybe on the one on the left, middle left, that one, yeah. It looks a little stark, but the thing that's amazing about that area, maybe because the color has faded out on these, is that you could drink the water right out of the melting glaciers, so had that experience of this absolutely incredible crystal clear water. And it was on the mountain when I did my all-night vision quest that I actually out for 2 days. I had a hypothermia experience and had a near-death experience. And it was actually that near-death experience that opened the vulnerability up to have the land in the sky meet me. So that's what got the whole thing started for me on the path that I've been on. And then,
So Daniel, on that trip, you were already an astrologer, but you weren't doing astrology necessarily on that trip?
I was actually. In fact, for a while I was Joan's astrologer. No,
Okay.
I was doing even back when I was a TM teacher, and the other meditational organization I was in, I was doing astrology, lots and lots and lots of astrology. In fact, I became for a while kind of a persona non grata in the TM circles, because Maharishi at that point was totally against astrology. That's a whole other story that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here today. But no, I had a practice since 1970, actually. And so then at that during that time in my life, 1981 through 82, actually through 1984, I lived in Los Angeles. That was the only time in my life I had a so-called corporate job. I was working as a system analyst in Los Angeles, but I was so completely captured by the land and the sky that as often as possible, my friend Howard and I and some other friends, we would go out to Joshua Tree, about 2.5 hour drive from Los Angeles, and to camp and to be with the sky. And it was actually then in January of 1982 that the next major thing happened. In fact, maybe you can bring up the Wonderland of Rocks imagery.
And by the way, everyone, this is on Daniel's personal page, thegiamarioapproach.com. Quite a treasure trove of photos here from your
As well
trips,
as lots
Daniel.
of other things that would not be found on the Turning of the Ages website. My favorite, my list of different, my favorite music albums of all time, favorite concerts of all time, and there's a lot of other stuff. But the main books that have been inspired my journey and so on. All right, so here, this is on the entrance to what is called the Wonderland of Rocks. And so all during the rest of 1981 and 1982, I was exploring Joshua Tree. There's me back in 1982, sitting there in the Wonderland of Rocks. God, I mean, that was over 40 years ago. And there that is the rock formation that I refer to as Grandfather Rock. And it was there at the Magi full moon in January of 1982. It was a full moon eclipse, although the eclipse wasn't visible in North America. It was visible in Europe, but it was an incredible full moon, and it was during that particular early morning that this rock formation sent me messages. It's as if it actually, I experienced it as the rock spoke to me, and it said, you are now to be my apprentice, and the way that the apprenticeship will work is that you are to come and be with me one weekend a month for a year. And so therefore, during from January of 1982 until the following year, early the next year, I fulfilled that. I went there every one weekend a month from Los Angeles, and I started taking small groups there. I had friends who wanted to go, and we'd camp on the ground and do some astrology. I was, of course, doing astrology for everyone. And it was during those small gatherings, as well as my solo times out there, ably assisted also by my old friend Howard. And my gosh, Howard, if you ever have a chance to hear this, are you still out there somewhere? I'd love to reconnect with you. I have had no idea where you are these days, but yeah, he and I were the two that were exploring that area. And so there's many more shots of this incredible area. There's some of the people that there's a 1982 picture of me, more 82 pictures of me in that area, incredible area. And that is actually what the first transmissions, the first ideas around connecting the land and the sky and doing a different form of astrology were coming through. That's truly, if you like stones and rock patterns and Virgo patterning of the land and the sky, there's nothing better than Joshua Tree. That's a close-up of where Grandfather Rock is, and I would camp right down below that. I mean, that was just below that picture is where I would set up camp and get the transmissions. So that's a good sense of Joshua Tree, and it's still out there in pretty good shape. I believe I haven't been out there for a while, although when there's one of the original groups that I took out there back in '82, and there's Howard on the far left actually there, and right. And otherwise, I don't really know where the rest of those people are right now. Oh, actually, the one in the middle, the guy in the middle, I still have contact with, but the others I don't know. Interesting time. Love that time period. And then also during the time I was doing that apprenticeship in Joshua Tree, and then that started in 1982. And between 1982 and 1989, every year in August at the Aquarian full moon, which in our school we call the Vision Quest full moon, I would go to Mount Shasta. And the last time I took a group to Mount Shasta as part of these early trainings was in 1989, where we took 50 people back into an even more remote valley than Squaw Valley. At that time, lots of people were going there to do solos and doing meditation retreats, and so there were too many people in Squaw Valley. So we went further over to a more remote valley, and we went in for 6 days, and that was the time period of the total eclipse of the moon of in August of 1989. It was the last time I took a group there, but it was I still kept going there all through the 90s, usually by myself. I several times did 7-day solos back in that valley. It was quite a spot, you know. So actually, I guess you could say at this point that during those years those were the two prime spots. Actually, though, I don't want to leave out also the magic that came to me through Hawaii, because by 1984, I had left the computer programming world, corporate world, and it was I started going to Hawaii and mainly to Maui for a long period of time. And by 1986, I had relocated to Maui. And then in 1986 to about 1992, I would spend half time in Hawaii and half time on mainland U.S. and would be actually on regular tour. There's a whole during the summer. It was like a regular trip through different places. Always every year to Nevada City, Grass Valley. Always every year to Albuquerque, to San Antonio, Texas, Kansas City, and Tucson and Phoenix. And Seattle. These are all places that were part of my oh, and Atlanta, Georgia, where I was actually born. That's how I connected up a lot with Anya, who I first met on Maui, but then she relocated back to Atlanta. And so I would do many trips there, setting up circles, doing Vision Quest groups whenever possible. We did that a lot in also in Sedona, and out and around Albuquerque, around Kansas City. We would do outside events and camping events. At that time period, the organization was operating under a corporation sole approach, which I mentioned was another nonprofit vehicle that I was using. And at that point, the organization, other than what we were calling our workshops, was the Astrological Vision Quest. So you would go out and spend a few days on the land, and you'd go out alone for a night, and then meanwhile, all kinds of astrology was being done during the day. And so that is actually how a lot of the techniques that we use in the paradigm and the initial expression of the school was being formed at that point through the Astrological Vision Quest. Yeah.
So nowadays, I mean, and ever since 2020, when our in-person event that we had scheduled that year had to be canceled, so much has gone online. But what would you say did you experience as the benefit or the value of for the people that you brought out onto the land to have these astrological experiences actually on the land under the sky versus in an online setting?
Well, I mean, back then there was not there wasn't the option of doing it the Zoom way, right? But meanwhile, there were plenty of groups that were meeting indoors, like classroom style and that kind of thing. But ever since that thing that happened to me in 1981 with Joan and her group at the Ojai Foundation, actually one of the other individuals, he wasn't on the Vision Quest experience at Shasta, but he was part of Ojai Foundation at that point. The man who in modern times for not for for non-indigenous people, the man who introduced the concept of council was part of that group. And oh my gosh, I'm actually still having as one of my friends and clients is his daughter. I think he's still alive, and he's in his 80s now. Uh, Jack Zimmerman, who developed the idea of council. And when you're in a circle and you share the talking stick so I've always felt that being on the land under the sky is the best way for the magic to happen and create community, small community, family. And I've always emphasized I mean, it's been a tremendous heartbreak and grief for me, actually, of not since the events of early 2020 to not more easily do that. We're trying to bring that back, as you know. We know, for those of you who are listening to this who don't know it, we're having our first all-school in-person gathering in April, just north of Tucson, Arizona, in a very appropriately named small town called Oracle. And you don't have to be certified, don't have to be an astrologer. I mean, if you're just interested in this body of knowledge, and want to get involved with other individuals that that are interested in these same kinds of things, please consider coming to that event. Many things on all levels: new material, beginners groups, even a musical jam with Gemini Brett and John Dumas, our old friend and member of the school, will all be there for that event. So, in answer to your question, it's hard for me to imagine how. I mean, one of the missions and purpose of the school is to create, to find, nurture, and seed people, for whatever comes next. And I don't know how that can happen unless you meet in person, heart to heart, soul to soul. I'm not dissing the possibility of connecting this way using modern technology, but it's just simply not the same as when you are able to hug another person, to look at the other person really in the eye, and to know their heart, and to share heart and soul with each other in circle and counsel. I think that's when this version of astrology really comes alive. Does that answer your curiosity there? And I think you have had that experience yourself.
Yeah, and I look forward to the school coming back to the land once again, now that we're able to start meeting in person again, and hopefully we won't have to stop that again.
And actually, then we have so I mentioned Joshua Tree, and I mentioned Mount Shasta, and all the touring I was doing. But then I do want to just put a little bit more attention on what happened for me when I was in Maui, because it was actually in 1987 during Saturn square Saturn nodal return at age 37 that for the first time realized that yep, in fact, I can actually be an absolute, complete, full-time astrologer. I still had a little bit of feet dangling in the old world. And at that point, it really took off for me. I had my own radio show in Maui, and in fact, actually, for a long period of time, I was the only full-time astrologer on the whole island, and kind of became a sort of a minor celebrity on the island. In fact, it was very difficult to go to a movie without people, kind of coming up and say, "Hey, do you remember when you did that reading?" Or what do you think about my moon in Leo or whatever? And I said, "What?" I would just try to be anonymous, to go to a movie. I couldn't get away with it. Those days were amazing, and I had a rental car going around. I would actually drive all over the island. I have a reading in Kihei, and then the next one in a couple hours from now is in Lahaina, so I would drive over there. Now I have to get back over to Walo to do another one. So it's just I really learned the island. But even more than that is that many, many, many backpack trips into Haleakala Crater, and that had a huge influence on me. In fact, when I look back on it, that's actually what drew me there. I don't have too many photos from that time period, but that's me at the top of Haleakala before. That might have been coming out or going down in. I don't know, but that's maybe a huge pack of stuff down there. There were times I would spend 7 days down in the crater. I would always do that around New Year's, actually, and that's also from the top looking down. And I think these photos, yeah, let me just scroll through the other ones that I have there. It's very cold right up at the top, and you can see the snow on the ground there. Actually, that's about 10,000 feet. But when you get down at 6,000 feet, it's really quite a bit different. And those bring back memories. Definitely looking at those. I wish I had some other photos of the groups and whatever I was doing back in those years in the 80s. So that was another very important part of the development of the vision and the experience necessary for developing the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and then leading into now the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. The other primary influence, really, during that halcyon time in the 1980s were regular trips to the British Isles. And my first trip to Scotland happened in 1984. And then I made it for the first time to Callanish in 1985, and then was at Callanish in 1987 in the Outer Hebrides when the moon walked on the land. And all of those adventures I also did together with Howard. Although Howard was not there in 1987, I don't believe, for the moon. Maybe he was, I can't remember. But these are some photos of Callanish from some of the events that happened there. And that's a little hotel we would stay at. Actually, I've been to that area, I think 13 times now, and very much hoping to go back with a group for the lunar standstill in next year now. And we featured these. Now, this is not in the 80s. This was actually a photo from an event that happened actually more recently. That's Anya there also, and that's one of our renaissance of the sacred groups that we did in 2014. But still, the stones look the same. And that's the woman who recently passed away, who was a good friend of mine, who lived there for 30, 40 years, and kind of the high priestess of Callanish and the stones. And she knew more about that area than anyone. And I met her first in 1984, no, 85. And then it was every 19 years I would try to get back there for the moon walking on the land. That's one of the many stones. These are different gatherings that we had there. But it was certainly the time in 1985 and 1987 that were the ones that really changed my life. In fact, I'm sure you'll get to the most iconic of all the photos. It's the different groups we had there. These are just some other shots of this. Go back to that one, Awen, for a moment. When you're at the main stone circle at Callanish, and in fact, for many of the other adjacent stone circles, there would be different orientations toward what this figure in the background. It looks like a woman lying on her back. You can see her nose there. You can see her body. And she's known as different names: the Kaliak, the old woman of the Moors, the sleeping beauty. And 6,000 years ago, all the ceremonies there were oriented toward her as Earth Mother. And it's really interesting about Margaret Curtis, who we saw the photo of before. She went there at first as a very rational scientist and didn't believe any of this old stuff until she lived there long enough, and she realized, of course, it had to be true. She got so good at knowing that whole area that she could discern where there would be another stone circle that was buried in the peat. And they would dig in the area where she saw where one should be, and sure enough, there would be the stones buried in the peat. And actually, I'll just put in a plug for it right now. Gemini Bratt and myself are going to be doing a whole series of seminars, starting with a free preview on February 15 about the lunar standstill, on all things out of bounds moons, out of bounds planets, anything you've ever wanted to know about that, but with an emphasis really strongly on the land and how ancient people ceremonially worked with the 19-year cycle. And that's we have that now up, and there's a notice about it in our next newsletter that's going out in a couple of days. Do you have that iconic photo of the moon walking on the land? Hmm. Now, this is absolutely not the sun. This is the moon. And if you can see where the moon is relative to the highest stone, for about an 18-month period, the the moon, as it crosses the stones at the lowest southern arc, and this was the full moon closest to the June solstice in 1987. For about 18 months, every phase of the moon would pass lower than that highest stone, the tip of the highest stone. And this was the shot in 1987 that really captured it, I think. I mean, we had that night that we were there, it was magical because it was rainy and misty like it usually is in the Outer Hebrides. And just around sunset, just as the moon was rising and the sun was setting, everything cleared up and it got warm, actually. And it was as if it had returned to the conditions of 6,000 years ago. Can't even, it was still, I can't even believe how it happened, because when we were there in 2006 for the next land still, it didn't happen like that. It was misty and rainy, and so you could just get little shots of the moon, but not like this. And during the 3-4 hours of the moon rising and setting at its southern extreme, the moon would pass over the Sleeping Beauty, the Kaliak, the Old Woman of the Moors, and then at around 3 or 4 in the morning, it would roll through this area where the main stones of Callanish were. And I've always felt that the ancient people would use that time period as something like a Neolithic Woodstock, and to get together. The tribes would show up. The people would come down from Denmark up. They would come up from from Wales, from the Stonehenge area. People would come over from Ireland. And at that time period, in matrilineal times, you couldn't marry someone of your own tribe. So it would be a time period of matchmaking, of trade fairs, music, celebration, ceremony that would happen around the time of the moon walking on the land. And this is all coming back now. The weird thing about the lunar standstill, it wasn't even named that. Western people didn't even know about this phenomena until Alexander Thom, in his circle in 1969. The previous standstill got together in their group and came up with the nomenclature for it as the lunar standstill. So, boy, I mean, I would have to put the experience at Callanish and the Outer Hebrides in Scotland and Haleakala and Mount Shasta and Joshua Tree as being the primary, sources of the whole transmission that first came from the Vision Quest in 1981, as well as being, I mean, basically my lifestyle at that time period in the 80s when we were doing the Astrological Vision Quest and under the Harbingers of the Turning of the Ages, involved having a lifestyle that was rather like a traveling musician. So I would go into Albuquerque, I would go into Santa Fe, I would go into Taos, I would go into San Antonio, Sedona. These are all places, and as often as possible, I would connect with local astrology organizations and speak at their local groups. I did that in Tucson and also in Phoenix. Actually, back from the about 1986 is when I started doing that. But it was these in-person gatherings and putting it into practice, meeting with people all over the country and Europe and Hawaii and so on, that really sourced it and kind of grounded it before in 1992, meeting up with Kaylin Castell and creating the 501, well, it wasn't 501c3 until 2007, but early versions of the school and the beginning of certification programs and that kind of thing. And then it's moved into the third wave. So, I mean, a lot of this that I'm sharing here was inspired by you, Awen, asking me to talk about, what was happening in the first wave. So please, anything that's coming to mind that you want to ask me about those years, it's just, all I can say, it's kind of mind blowing for me here in 2023 to think back that was It started 42 years ago.
Yeah, well, I guess the first question maybe is, what does the word harbingers mean? Or how do you describe how you use that word?
An announcer, a making it well known, or like announcing it. Actually, a kind of a funny side story is that having studied with Rajar, I became very enamored with the Sabian symbols, his version of the Sabian symbols. And so I was always trying to get a sense of what my own Sabian symbol was for my rising sign. And so there's a very evocative one I'm paraphrasing right now. I don't have it in front of me, but it's like uh, a chanticleer announcing the dawn. Now, a chanticleer is a rooster, so like a rooster that is announcing the rising of the sun. And so this is connected to your question about what's a harbinger, right? So Rajar says he's really funny because one hand he said that there are going to be individuals, visionary individuals, that will announce, kind of a new beginning. However, it's extremely important to remember the rooster cannot end up believing that it is causing the sun to rise, but rather is simply announcing that there is something happening. And so that brings up another thing that was happening in the 80s. It was actually in the 80s that I coined the expression, the turning of the ages, which is back then there was a lot of stuff that was being done and working with the night sky about recognizing that there was this significant time period of where the galactic plane, this plane of the solar system and the solstices would line up. And that became then a major feature of the teaching, that when we became aware of the fact that it was in 1998 that it was the exact alignments of those different features. But during the 1980s, we knew it was not about the age of Aquarius. It was something far greater than that. It was a great turning of the ages. And while at that time period I didn't know about the rest of the converging timelines, I really only knew about the precessional cycle. But since then, now in the new awarenesses and the evolution of the understanding, we now know there are many more timelines converging in the time period 1962 to 2032, with a very peak point being about 2012 to 2025, which is the time, of course, we're in now, and we can call it a great turning of the ages. But that all came through with a lot of the work on the land, with the land and sky back in the 80s. So yeah, that's harbinger. Other people use that word. It's a less known word, but than simply an announcer I certainly, I guess I could have gotten really cute and said Chanticleer of the turning of the ages. But that egoic thing of like, well, you made it happen. Well, no, you just know it's happening and you're announcing it, So that's what a harbinger is.
Well, yeah, and it seems appropriate for your younger years to get the word out and then to eventually form a mystery school. So I know you've written extensively and there's articles on our website about what is a mystery school, but maybe would you want to just sort of briefly describe your vision, maybe, or for now that the word has been out for 40 plus years, where do you?
Well, actually, I don't think in the 80s, I don't believe it was the Astrological Vision Quest and the Harbingers of the Turning of the Ages. It's an interesting point. I'm not sure when exactly I started using Mystery School. In fact, I've been trying to remember actually when I started using the expression shamanic astrology. It was in the 80s. I have these files of old flyers, and one of these days I'll try to go through all of those files and find the one that shows that word for the first time, right? But as far as what is a mystery school, first of all, we're at a time period where I don't think that anything should be kept secret. And a lot of times when you think of mystery school, it sounds like it's, hidden, occult, secret, and that kind of thing. I look at when I think of the expression mystery school, I think of mystery as in great mystery. So therefore, it's a school associated with unveiling, connecting with, resonation with great mystery. But then there's another ingredient that has always been true about mystery schools, and that is the fact that they do require initiation. It's different um, uh, than simply reading about something in a book or having left brain knowledge, but having a direct connection with great mystery. And since there are many different kinds of mystery schools, not all associated with astrology or astronomy, but in this, but you're going to use astrology or astronomy, then it's really having a connection, a deep connection through the process of initiation with the land and sky. So in our school now, we do have different stages of it. I mean, there's a foundational certification that is not so heavy on initiatory processes on the land and sky, but rather it's just learning the paradigm itself. But to be fully initiated into this mystery school, that does require those other forms of initiation, working with stone circles or hierophany, or becoming familiar over a period of time with land and sky, and as well as knowing the version of astrology that is presented through this school. So it's the process of initiation and getting away from this idea that there's some secret elite that knows stuff. I mean, it's not that aspect of mystery school, but that it's available. All the stuff is available, but still, it does require a certain discipline, a certain commitment, certain sacrifice in certain ways in order to um, be fully initiated in the mystery school.
Well, and I love that the idea, as I understand it, is that the elite, so-called elite information becomes available when you receive it from Great Mystery itself. And that's the
Right.
whole point of the Astrological Vision Quest and being on the land and having the shamanic direct connection.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, people sometimes ask, why for a long time period were you emphasizing the expression shamanic? And actually, there's many answers to that. But the one that directly relates to what we're speaking about right now is that to form a relationship energetically with the land and the sky and the seasons and the planets and the stars and the constellational patterns, and to be able to receive direct transmission from them, as opposed to what you might read as a set of rules in a textbook, that, well, Aries always means blah, blah, blah. No, not really, not necessarily. And a very major feature of our school is the organic evolution of the mystery schools, the signs, into different forms at different time periods in history. And there's no better time for one to be able to tune into how that's changing, evolving, than at a great turning of the ages. Right. So we're trying to. Well, my ideal would be is that anyone fully initiated into this mystery school would actually, if not already receiving those kinds of transmissions directly from land and sky, that they are really dedicated to that process, that they are working it. I mean, there's different people get it quicker or slower than others, and in different ways. I mean, for example, not everyone is visual, not everyone is tactile. I mean, we have different talents and skills for tuning in to the transmissions that might come from the stellar archetypal energies or land energies, the one having to do with the seasons, being oriented toward the directions, and the magic of how the Earth is oriented in space. Is that anything else? Please, this is your chance to find out about the first wave.
Well, so just having taken that sort of trip down memory lane and looking at the backstory of where we're at now in this third wave, what would you say is your highest goal for the future, or what initiated the need for a third wave, or the what is the outcome you could hope for to see in the future development of the school?
A lot of it is contingent, really, on the ability, as we move forward, to meet again often and easily with land and sky, and with hopefully something changes so the sky is not so dominated and polluted by Starlink and all the rest of the satellites that are up there. That the light pollution diminishes, and that public land and magical sacred sites are still available to be able to be visited and be worked with ceremonially. So there's that element that is completely beyond any control of. But as far as what I would hope for is to have an evolving mystery school that is open to new transmissions, and to be there at the cutting edge of change in the world, but mainly to have it be to locate the individuals, and I got this from Rajar, who will be the seed people for whatever eventuality takes place. The whole seed person document is on our website. That is Dane Rajar's vision of seed people back in 1973, and I've tried to live my life in accordance with that document, actually, about the becoming a seed person, and that seed person then has a connection to the wisdom of the past, is open-minded to a lot of the new material that's coming through right now, but is all and is not fixated on any dogma, and then becomes, for, as I say, for whatever happens, a living time capsule to be able to create a renaissance. And renaissance means rebirth. You know, you take what's wonderful from the past, and then you keep what's effective and useful now, and to be able to then be open-hearted and open-minded enough to receive the new material that's coming through from what happens after a great turning, or whether in from other frameworks, you know, one of the other timelines is the fourth turning. What happens after a fourth turning? And that's just relative to Western, so-called Western civilization, U.S. and Europe, where there was a great fourth turning that is happening in 2025. So we're in the midst of a big shift into something else. Maybe another thought in answer to your question is that I'm committed to, and this is another way of keeping it, quote, shamanic, in a sense, but we can use other words there, which is a commitment to maintaining our connection, not dominion over the natural world, but our connection to our organic human 1.0 connection to land and sky, and to our another thing that I really get inspired by, and from the shamanic approach, from some of the writers, we as human beings become a whole human being more from our connections to different animals than the minds of other humans. You know, so what makes a human being is because of connections to wolves and bisons and eagles and whales and dolphins, and basically human beings are kind of a synthesis of all the life forms that exist on this beautiful blue planet. And the disappearance of species and a disconnect from animal and plant life is also something that grieves me a lot.
Well, I hear that, and love the fact that on our school's website, we have a big emphasis on the 4 branches of the school, right? That it is the Turning of the Ages Mystery School is more than just astrology. It's about preserving this whole concept that you're speaking of, right?
Spirituality, ceremony. You know, it's not just astrology. It's sort of another version of the expression that Gemini Brett took. You know, more than astrology. Yeah, yeah. So the school is like 4 things. Ceremony and astronomy or cosmology, astrology, and the I'm blanking. The four main things there that are on our website. I think
Well, right, we
without
break it down by the 4 elements, right? So
right,
Earth
right. The
is
4 branches of the school. So it's our connection to ceremony and the land, um, more like core shamanism or connection to stone circles and sacred sites, and then the spirituality of like the underpinnings of this are people like Aurobindo and Steiner and Rijar and many other amazing luminaries that have inspired the philosophy. Then there's the psychological aspect of how do we help other people, the counseling and parent-child relationships, and the way of transmitting these mysteries in a personal one-on-one thing through counseling. And then what is the nature of astrology? What is astrology for? And what is divination? This form of astrology is not deterministic. It's not a scientism. It's not cause and effect. It's designed to connect individuals with great mystery and as quickly as possible to discern what our life purpose is.
and isn't that important at the turning of the ages, right?
Yeah, it's not like let's wait for next life. I mean, this is the time period of the fastest acceleration and recapitulation of what human beings have been up to on this planet, and I think possibly as long as 300,000 years. 12 precessional cycles, and certainly not what mainstream scientism education says that we've only been the way we are for 6,000 years, and we've always been like a warlike species. And no, I think for a much longer period of time, we've been collaborators and in partnership, men and women working together heartfully, and not out of separation or domination.
So I guess one last question would just be, what would you say that would be, in a nutshell, the value of attending courses with this new version of the school, or taking any of our certification program, or just attending webinars, getting involved?
The sense of being around other like-minded human beings, where you can actually connect heart to heart in person, and look into another person's eyes, really organically, to hug, to be encircled, to to share, and to basically not to feel isolated, not to know that there are other individuals out there that are thinking along the same lines, and connect with our brothers and sisters that way.
Right. And we provide a lot of teachings to help others do that in their own lives as well, right?
Right. So, and I'll just last thought on this, and we'll probably have to wrap this up for this our sharing here right now. That here, circa early 2023, there are a great number of astrological Zoom classes and even events. Not that many in-person ones at all. And there's, of course, reasons for that, which we don't need to elaborate at the moment. But here is one we're offering that's in person for 6 days, you know. So and then we'll have other ones coming up. I mean, you hosted one there in Bisbee for our graduation ceremony for 5 people is fully certified, including yourself. So we'll do that again too.
Right, yeah, that event Daniel's speaking of is in April 11th to 17th, I believe, right?
Yeah, yes, that's right.
And the details are right on the website, turningoftheages.com.
So great questions, and talk to you all on the next video blog next month. Okay, bye.